There are actors who do not need to change themselves to survive through time. Time adjusts itself to fit them. Not because they run faster, nor because they try to become something bigger, but because they understand something very rare: when to move forward and when to stand still. Michael Caine is one of them. A voice that is unmistakable, an expression so controlled it almost feels like he doesn't need to act. He is not the kind of actor who overwhelms audiences with intensity, not someone who dominates the screen with energy, and certainly not someone who tries to build a legendary image for himself. Yet in a very quiet way, he has never disappeared. From a poor boy growing up in wartime London, where everything was scarce and there was no space for distant dreams, to a face that has spanned generations of cinema, from post-war British films to Hollywood to modern blockbusters where he is no longer the center of the story, but the one who keeps everything from falling apart. There are actors who create moments, but there are also those who become part of time itself. Michael Caine belongs to the latter. And because of that, the real question is not about fame, not about the number of roles, nor about the awards he has received. The question lies in something simpler, yet harder to answer. How can an actor exist for more than 6 decades without being forgotten? And more importantly, how can one change with time without losing oneself? Michael Caine was born in 1933 in London, under the name Maurice Micklewhite. But his story did not begin with cinema. It began in a very different place, the working-class streets of South London, where life was defined by manual labor and simple meals, not by dreams. His family was not poor in a romantic sense, but poor in the most practical way. His father worked as a porter at Billingsgate Fish Market, a physically demanding job that started very early and ended when the body was exhausted. His mother took on various odd jobs, from cleaning to cooking for others. There was no stability, no excess. Everything was just enough, or slightly lacking. In that small home, there were no books about art. No one spoke about acting. The only thing that existed was the discipline of life. Go to work, earn money, and continue the next day. Then the war came, and everything became harsher. When World War II began, London became a target of air raids. For a child, that did not carry political meaning, but meant sleepless nights, sirens, and the feeling that anything familiar could disappear overnight. Michael Caine was evacuated from London, like thousands of other children, to escape the bombings. But leaving his family was not a release. It was another form of instability. There was nowhere truly safe, only different levels of danger. There were nights when he and his family stayed in bomb shelters, listening to explosions above. No one spoke much. No one explained. But everyone understood. Strong reactions did not help. Silence was sometimes the only way to remain calm. It was during those years that something began to form inside him. Not ambition, not a passion for art, but a kind of emotional control that was almost instinctive. No display, no outburst, just observation and keeping everything within reach. After the war, London did not recover immediately. The neighborhood still carried the marks of bombing. Life was still difficult. And for a boy like him, there were not many choices. There was no clear path to success, only one direction: to keep moving forward, by any means possible. That was not a childhood that created an artist. It was a childhood that created a man who understood, if you cannot control yourself, the world will do it for you. Michael Caine entered the world of acting, not as someone pursuing art, but as someone looking for another way to survive. His life in the 1950s bore no resemblance to the romantic image of a young actor full of ambition. He lived in small, rented rooms, the typical working-class London bedsit, where a single space had to serve as a bedroom, a living area, and a place to think about the future. Money was always scarce. Work was unstable. And each day began with a very simple question. What will I do today to be able to continue tomorrow? He took any job he could, from backstage assisting, carrying props, to playing small roles in touring theater companies. There were times he had to travel far from London, performing in small-town productions. Not out of passion, but because it was a rare opportunity to stand on stage, even if only for a few minutes. The life of an unknown actor back then had no glamour. It was cold mornings, cheap train rides, long auditions where no one remembered you after you left. Some days, he had just enough money for a simple meal. Other days, he wasn't even sure he had work. British television at the time was beginning to develop, and he appeared in a number of small roles. Roles where his name was not even properly credited. A brief scene, a line of dialogue, then gone. But to him, that was not failure. It was data. Every time he stood in front of the camera was a chance to learn how to exist within the frame. And within that unstable life, a quiet shift began to take place. He started to realize that trying to impress often made things feel artificial. Actors who tried to do too much were often the first to be rejected. So he did the opposite. He reduced. He kept his calm. He didn't try to perform. He simply existed. It was also during this period that the name Maurice Micklewhite began to become an obstacle, not because it was wrong, but because it did not fit the system. And in a very practical moment, he decided to change it. Inspired by the film The Caine Mutiny, he chose the name Michael Caine, a name that was easier to remember, shorter, more suited to a world where opportunities often come very quickly and disappear just as fast. But the new name did not bring immediate success. Rejections continued. Small roles repeated. There were periods when he came very close to giving up, not because he lacked ability, but because there was no evidence that his efforts would be rewarded. And then, within the very length of those failures, he learned the most important thing. Acting is not about doing more than others, not about trying to be special, but about knowing exactly when to stop, when to remain silent, when to let the audience see what they need to see. In a world where everyone is trying to be noticed, Michael Caine began to build something else. Not an image, but absolute control. Michael Caine did not step into the spotlight with an immediate explosion. But by 1964, with Zulu, audiences began to notice him for the first time. Not because he tried to stand out, but because he was unlike anyone else. In a war film filled with familiar archetypes, he did not build the image of a classical, heroic officer. He kept everything minimal, calm, precise, and within that control, there was a sense of something very real. But it was not until Alfie that everything truly changed. There, Michael Caine did not just play a role. He redefined a type of character. Alfie was not a character built to be liked. He was a young man living in London, working as a driver, moving through relationships superficially, always putting himself first, and almost never feeling guilt in the traditional sense. He was charming, intelligent, humorous, but at the same time cold, selfish, and irresponsible. A man who did not try to become better, but simply tried to use life in the way that benefited him most. But what made this character special was not only in the personality, it was in the way he performed it. The Cockney accent, something once considered unsuitable for proper cinema, was kept intact, not hidden, not softened. No attempt to turn himself into a traditional gentleman. He brought his own background onto the screen and turned it into identity. The acting style followed that same direction. No exaggeration, no explanation. No attempt to guide the audience's emotions. Just the eyes, the rhythm of speech, and an almost absolute control over every expression. He did not act for others to understand, but to let them feel. In a time when cinema was still dominated by idealized and somewhat distant figures, Michael Caine appeared as a disruption. Not a hero to be admired, but a very real human being, with flaws, imperfect choices, and an almost cold honesty. And right there, something new began to form. Not a star in the traditional sense, but an entirely different kind of character, more modern, more realistic, and reflecting a generation that was changing. After Alfie, Michael Caine was no longer a new name. But what was remarkable was not that he became famous, but how he handled that fame. He did not allow himself to be confined within a single image. He did not become the Alfie-type man repeated across films. Instead, he began to move between different worlds of cinema, from action, crime, and comedy, to more psychologically complex stories. In The Italian Job, he brought a character who appeared light, even humorous, yet still retained sharpness and control. A man who did not need to threaten, but you understood he always had the situation in hand. In contrast, in Get Carter, he became colder, darker, and almost entirely restrained in emotion. His character did not speak much, did not explain, did not seek sympathy. He simply acted and let the consequences speak for themselves. Just two roles, two completely different worlds. But they shared one thing: minimalism. Michael Caine did not build characters through grand expressions. He did not need long lines to explain emotion. Instead, he worked with smaller things, but more precise. A gaze held a moment longer, a pause between two lines, a reaction held back instead of released. And within those details, the audience began to believe in the character. At a time when many actors still relied on exaggeration to make an impression, he went in the opposite direction. He did not act big. He did not try to dominate the screen. He simply existed within it. And by doing that, he made everything around him feel more real. Other characters became more believable. The story became more intimate. Not because he did more, but because he did not do what was unnecessary. From the late 1960s to the 1980s, Michael Caine became one of the rare faces who could appear anywhere. British films, American films, commercial cinema, artistic films, without losing his identity. He did not belong to a genre. He did not belong to an image. He belonged to the act of storytelling. And in each of those stories, he did not try to become the center. He became the point that kept everything from drifting away from the truth. By the 1980s, when many thought Michael Caine had become a stable name in cinema, something else began to happen. He appeared more often, but not always better. Roles came continuously. Offers were not lacking, but the quality began to fluctuate. There were films that critics rated poorly, projects that even audiences quickly forgot. And gradually, a new label began to form around his name. A commercial actor, someone who takes roles for money, someone no longer as selective as before. On the surface, it looked like a decline, a phase where reputation began to fade, where quantity replaced quality. But if you looked closer, the story was not that simple. Michael Caine did not deny it. He even openly said that there were films he took purely for financial reasons, not for the script, not for artistic ambition, but for the real life behind the screen, family, responsibility, stability. And it is here that his perspective differed from the industry. Where others saw decline, he saw a choice. Not a choice between art and money, but a choice between ideals and reality. He did not try to protect his image at all costs. He did not refuse roles simply because they were not prestigious enough. Instead, he accepted something not every actor is willing to face. A career is not always a straight upward line. There are phases where you work to grow, and there are phases where you work to sustain. While many tried to maintain a perfect image, Michael Caine chose to keep working, even in films that were not remembered, even in roles that did not bring recognition. Because for him, stopping was the greatest risk. This was not a failure. This was a survival strategy, a very practical approach, from a man who never forgot where he came from. Amid a constantly changing career, Michael Caine built for himself something almost unchanged: his marriage to Shakira Baksh. Their story began in a way very different from Hollywood, not on a film set, not through industry connections, but through a television advertisement. Michael Caine saw Shakira Baksh on screen and was immediately drawn to her. Not in the sense of a passing infatuation, but as a very clear decision. He found a way to contact her. Called, was rejected, tried again, continued to be rejected. Some accounts say he called many times, not with urgency, but with a kind of persistence that was very characteristic. No exaggeration, no drama, simply not giving up. Eventually, they met. And what made this relationship different was not an explosive romance, but a sense of stability from the very beginning. Shakira Baksh was not swept up in the image of a movie star. She did not come from that world, and perhaps because of that, she was not influenced by it. They married in 1973, and from that point on, there were almost no scandals, no publicly known breakdowns, no cycles of separation and reunion as often seen in the entertainment industry. But what is more notable is the way Michael Caine speaks about this marriage. He does not describe it as something perfect. He describes it as a structure, something that provides order, provides clarity, and keeps him balanced when everything outside is constantly changing. He has admitted that Shakira was the one who helped him change his way of living. From a young man, quickly successful, easily drawn into the rhythm of fame, to someone more disciplined, more stable, and more aware of what truly matters. Not the career, not the image, but the life behind all of it. For decades, they have maintained a simple principle: always prioritize family. Always keep a distance from the chaos of the industry. and never let fame interfere with personal decisions. This may sound simple, but in Hollywood, it is almost an exception. And that very exception became an advantage. When his career passed through unstable phases, unsuccessful films, controversial decisions, his personal life did not collapse with it. It remained there, solid, unchanged. This marriage did not make him more famous, but it helped him not lose himself. And in a journey that has lasted more than half a century, that matters more than any role. By the late 1990s, when many thought Michael Caine had already passed through most of his journey, a new chapter began. Not loud, not a comeback in the traditional sense, but a very subtle shift. With The Cider House Rules, he won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. But what mattered was not the award, but his position within the film. He was no longer the center, no longer the one carrying the entire story. But every time he appeared, the story gained weight. It was a different kind of presence. Less in screen time, but more in meaning. And that very presence became the foundation for the next phase. When working with Christopher Nolan, Michael Caine was not chosen for past fame. He was chosen for something else: the ability to bring emotional stability to complex narratives. In The Dark Knight, he played Alfred, not a hero, not the center of action, but the one who keeps Bruce Wayne from losing himself. A calm voice in a chaotic world. In Inception, he appeared as an anchor point, a character who did not need much explanation, yet always brought clarity within overlapping layers of reality. And in Interstellar, he became part of a larger conflict, where science, belief, and personal choice collide. Once again, without grand performance, yet still creating weight. The common thread in all these roles is a shift in function. From a leading star, he became an emotional pillar, no longer the one who dominates the screen, but the one who keeps the story from losing its meaning. And what is remarkable is, he did not resist that change. He accepted it, adapted to it, and turned it into an advantage. While many actors try to hold on to the central position for as long as possible, Michael Caine did the opposite. He stepped back, not because he no longer had the ability, but because he understood that the story no longer needed him in that role. And that understanding gave him a second life. Not by returning to what he was before, but by becoming something else, deeper, steadier, and more enduring over time. Michael Caine did not build his legacy in the way many people think of a legend. He has 2 Academy Awards. He has more than 150 roles. He has appeared in films spanning multiple generations, from post-war British cinema to modern Hollywood. But if you look closer, those numbers are not what define him. Michael Caine's legacy does not lie in being the most technically skilled actor, not in complex performances, extreme transformations, or roles that are overtly performative. It lies in something much simpler: absolute minimalism, yet always effective. He does not try to express more than necessary. He does not try to mark each role with obvious distinction. Instead, he maintains one consistent element throughout, a way of being present that is truthful, understated, yet always precise. In every role, whether large or small, whether central or appearing in just a few scenes, he brings the same feeling. You believe in that person, not because he convinces you, but because he does nothing that makes you doubt. And that creates a very particular kind of legacy. Not moments of explosion that are remembered forever, but a continuous presence across time. Michael Caine represents a kind of actor that cinema always needs, but is rarely spoken of as great in the traditional sense. Acting so natural, it is almost invisible. The ability to adapt, from leading roles to supporting roles, from British cinema to Hollywood, and most importantly, longevity, the ability to exist across decades without becoming outdated. He did not try to become a legend. And perhaps because of that, he became part of the history of cinema. Michael Caine began from a very simple place. A poor boy in South London, growing up in wartime, with no artistic background, no advantage, no clear path leading to cinema. And then, he became an icon. Not the kind of icon built to be admired from afar, not an image kept at a safe distance, for audiences to only look up to, but a human being who kept his sense of reality, even while standing at the center of the industry. He never tried to become a legend, and because of that, he was never separated from reality. For more than 6 decades, Michael Caine did not follow a straight path. There were periods of success. There were periods of controversy. There were choices others did not understand. But through it all, one thing never changed. He kept going. He did not stop to protect an image. He did not try to preserve an older version of himself. He did not resist time. He worked with it. And in that, the answer begins to become clear. An actor endures, not because they are the greatest, not because they are the most perfect, but because they understand when to change and when to remain. Michael Caine did not hold on to everything. He only held on to what mattered most, his core. And in a world that is always changing, that is enough for him to never be forgotten. Michael Caine is not the model of an actor striving to reach greatness. He does not pursue perfection. He does not build a legend for himself. He does only one thing throughout his entire life: to continue. An actor who appears when the story needs him. An icon, but never separates himself from reality. And in the end, a man who never tried to become a legend, yet endured far longer than many other legends. Perhaps that is not the way to become the most famous, but it is the way to never disappear. If you are drawn to the quiet truth behind legendary names, subscribe to Icons and Legacies, where we explore not just fame, but what remains after it fades.